Hello, I'm Rachel Richards, former BBC correspondent, parenting coach and mother of 2 teenagers and 2 older stepdaughters.
And hi, I'm Susie Asley. I'm qualified mindfulness instructor and psychotherapist and mother of 3 teenagers. 2 of them are twins.
Welcome. Pull up a chair, tune out all of your other responsibilities and let's begin. Coming up later in the episode, we talk about an issue raised by a school teacher. She says most of her kids seem to give up after their first attempt at anything. She's struggling to motivate them to push beyond that initial discomfort. But first, it's human nature to form groups both for pleasure and defence. Any parent will tell you that these groups or cliques can be fraught with problems for their teens. In this episode, we're going to talk about the issue from a girl's perspective, but hopefully it's helpful to all parents. And if you're a parent who's seen your daughter going through hell as a result of these groups, it can be profoundly upsetting, particularly if it brings back horrible memories. But here's the upside. It's a very important training ground for her and will make her see the cost of trying to remain in a group against standing her ground when they're forcing her to do or be things she's uncomfortable with. It's going to profoundly influence her code of ethics and understanding of who she is. While you're listening to this, it's worth reflecting on your own experiences and how they've shaped your behaviour. What do you think, Susie?
Yeah, no, I love that angle of looking at your own experiences, because I think they can still sit with us, can't they, and feel quite painful. So when our daughters go through particular issues, suddenly we're 14,
transported back
without
to all
even
the nonsense.
realizing,
Yes.
and it might not be the same experience at all for her. So it's really important, actually, that we just reflect on our own stuff so that we're able to separate it when we're dealing with our own
Yes,
children.
like in our first episode, we actually talked about our own baggage as parents, and it's very difficult to separate up what's happening now from how we experience these things. And what's interesting about it is that when we talk about girl friendships, they do feel texturally different to the friendships that boys have. And you've got boys as well.
Yes. So I have twins, actually, a boy and a girl twin, and they approach friendship unbelievably differently. It's fascinating, actually.
But I think that both groups tend to see these, what they call friendship groups in inverted commas, they're really a defensive alliance. There are friendships within these groups, but actually when they form tight groups, it's all about being able to, it's like a platoon of soldiers trying to survive adolescence. And with girls in particular, it's a sense that you're either in the boat or you're out of the boat. And if you're out of the boat, you're drowning. Yeah. And it can feel very, very frightening for somebody who's sucked into that situation, or if they're in a school where that's quite prevalent.
Yes.
When they don't know how to get into a boat and,
yes.
and they're scared of falling out of it.
I think it can go in phases. I completely resonate with that. I think it can go in phases, for mine anyway, where if it's going well and everything is fine, then it's just a lovely support and a beautiful place to be a teenager in, and it's fun and silly and all of those lovely things. I think when it becomes tense, that's when it can become very quickly tricky. And I love the idea that actually it's a training ground. It's really, really helpful space to learn some values and to learn some skills, boundaries, for example. I mean, it's so important that we don't just, let people walk on us. And that's really hard when you're 14 and you just want to fit in and belong. But it's really important.
So Rosalind Wiseman wrote a seminal book on this topic called Queen Bees and Wannabes. And I went back to it. I did actually buy it years ago because I have 2 older stepdaughters and I wanted to arm myself. So I've had experience of both sets of them going through this sort of experience, and it varies enormously. So, for example, one of my daughters, she was at a school where they had 2 boarding houses for girls and they had been pitted against each other. And she said, it's really disappointing because you turn up at a school and already you've excluded half your possible female friendships because they're in a different boarding house. So the structures around them can make a difference. But one of the points that was made in Queen Bees and Wannabes, this book that I've basically reread again because I needed to think about this, and she's brilliant. I have to say she's brilliant. Is she says adolescence is a beauty pageant. And even if your daughter doesn't want to be a contestant, she has no choice. And this will be the same for boys to an extent, but it's not quite as rigid and tightly constructed, because girls are getting messages all the time about what being a girl means. And if you're outside of the box that is your particular group, you'll be punished for it.
Yeah, it's less intense for boys for sure.
Yes, and girls are constantly comparing themselves to each other. The way she dresses and marks herself will mark her as being part of that group. And there is a structure within these groups that obviously will change and can shift quite a lot. But this book really outlines them very well. And I thought they were fascinating. And what would be great is if I talk about the different categories, and people listening can think about whether they were in any of these particular roles, if they've seen any of these particular roles, if they've got friends who were in that role and are now still in that role.
Yeah, please share. We love a category. What am I?
So there's the Queen Bee, who's the head of the group, and she's the person who sets the tone for the group. So she decides what clothes are acceptable, what their meaning of their group is, and she can silence her peers with a look and then turn around and be incredibly nice. You're either with her or against her. Friendships are defined by her power and not mutual support. So she's the one, can be the one, where everyone says she's really popular, but nobody's really likes her. They're all a bit scared of her because she wields
definitely
so
one
much
of them
power.
in my school.
Right, yeah, she wields so much power.
Yeah.
And then she's got a sidekick. So she's got someone else who kind of patrols around with her and makes sure that, she can talk to about things and will back her up. Then there's the banker, which I thought was a great term. And the banker is someone who collects information from different members of the group or outside the group and then spends it like it's money. So the gossip, she uses it to actually control people and put them back in their places. Then there's the messenger who trades personal information and gossip about others, but her motivation is to reconcile the parties in the conflict. She's trying to gather power by gaining recognition of being the person who's trying to smooth things over. The pleaser and wannabe is somebody who tries to gain favour from the Queen Bee and anticipates what people want, but doesn't ask herself what she wants in return. So these girls are rewarded for being nice, and they're nice to everybody. The torn bystander is someone who is not very good at saying no. They've got a rubber arm, they're looking at something that's not very nice that's happening, and they just don't want to say anything. And her silence buys her social status. So she's in the group and she's just keeping quiet. Then there's the target, who's the person that they all set upon and they humiliate. And the hierarchy of the clique is maintained by having someone at the bottom. So someone's got to be there, or it's somebody outside. So this sort of gossiping and working together maintains the cohesion of the group. And that target won't always be the same. It will change.
When I hear that, it's fascinating. I think it's unbelievably... It resonates in a way that's really uncomfortable because it's, I totally recognise that from when I was probably 12, 13, not older. Then you kind of, I was lucky enough to have a different, a non-toxic friendship group. But it resonates in a really uncomfortable way. And I'm just thinking about my daughter as well, where she fits into that. Really interesting, fascinating.
Yes, and for me, when I read that, there's a final category called the champion, who isn't confined or controlled by this act like a woman box that's been created for this group. And she can take criticism, doesn't make people choose friends. She's got more high self-esteem. And personally, I don't remember when I was in school actively being member of a group. But part of that was because I moved every year and a half, 2 years, and we only stopped when I did go to secondary school, but I joined the secondary school late. And I was used by then to always being the target because because you know that every time you start in a new school, you're the odd one out and people will use you to try and gain power or pick on you. Yeah. And actually I built some really great defences. So I was always very pleasant and nice to people and very friendly. And at the same time, I just didn't get sucked into all of the, you've got to wear this, you've got, to fit in. So I was never a smoker. I never felt peer pressure. I just looked on. And so whilst I can sort of see these things, in a way, I was lucky because
Yeah.
I just never felt that pressure.
No, I guess that there are pluses and minuses with that, because that also sounds hard to be moving all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's really important as well to remember why these groups are formed at all. Like, that's really crucial. It's not just a pattern or a way of being mean. It's a survival mechanism because, you know, as we've spoken about before on this podcast, we all want to belong. We have, as human beings, we want to feel that we belong. We want to be seen and heard for who we are. And for teenagers, that's times 50.
Absolutely.
They want to be, especially girls, you know,
because they're moving out of their home,
yeah,
and they need to find a new tribe.
Yeah, they need to feel that they're belonging. So it's not just, oh, I need to be in this group. It's like, if I'm not in this group, then that is terrifying. So they would, you know, they would use these strategies unconsciously to stay in the group. And I think, you know, the target and a lot of the other ones, they fluctuate, don't they? They change depending on the weather, probably, or what the Queen Bees had for breakfast, you know.
Yes. And I believe it's wonderful because I have actually talked to all of my daughters about these roles, and they can, once you talk about them, it gives them power to be able to stand back and say, oh, and they can identify them. And in the book, she says, you don't need to use my terms. You can get your daughter to come up with her own terms because it may not fit perfectly with her group structure. But it's basically, what am I seeing here? And once I can identify the role and what they're trying to achieve, it makes it easier for me to navigate it.
I think it's brilliant. I'm going to definitely talk to my daughter about it and have a look at that book, because it makes it less personal, doesn't it? It's a pattern that is happening outside of themselves rather than it being a personal attack, which it also is. But, you know, and it depends on the characters of the girls, doesn't it? I mean, personalities are very different, their upbringing is very different. I have a daughter, and she wouldn't mind me saying this, she's quite aware of it. She's very, very sensitive. She's very sort of empathic. And so we've done, when she was younger, and we revisit it sometimes, she finds it hard to set boundaries. So we've done some role playing and, you know, just trying to help her to you know, learn that it's okay to say no. So I'm not quite sure which role she'd be, but she's definitely one of those.
She's probably the pleaser.
The pleaser, yeah.
Yes.
I'm thinking the pleaser is probably
And
her.
actually, the great thing is you coaching her and showing her how she can actually then move beyond that particular role will set her up for life. Because once you can identify yourself in that group and see there are some positives and some negatives, it will then give you a structure for the rest of your life to think about how you navigate.
Yes.
Because you'll be able to spot the people and think, okay, I can see what they're doing. And rather than just pleasing them, it's okay for me to disagree.
Yes, because she likes being the pleaser, and then people always come to her for advice, and she likes having that role, and that's who she is as well. But it also comes at a price, which is the boundary thing and the exhaustion of it. So yeah, it's a really helpful tool.
And you can tell the strength of a group by the punishment that will be meted out if you disagree with with the Queen Bee or with the group structure. So if you decide to wear something that doesn't fit within the group, you will be punished.
Yes.
Or, you know, whatever the categories are. Interestingly, she points out that there are two key things that are used to keep the control. And one is teasing and one is gossip. And the teasing's interesting because, of course, teasing is the cornerstone of great friendship. I look at the teasing that my husband and his friends hand out, and it's vicious, but it's hilarious. And it's just part of their being great mates, and nobody really takes offence.
It's banter, really,
it's
isn't
banter.
it?
It's banter, exactly. And this is great when you can, and my daughters have even said, oh, it's, you know, when you're great friends with someone when you can banter and nobody takes offence. Then there's unintentional bad teasing, where when the girl says, actually, that was really quite hurtful, the other girl will say, oh, I'm so sorry, I really didn't mean to offend you. That's just unintentional. But there's a lot of what they call the cutting teasing, where there's an attack on the most vulnerable area. And then when the girl tries to say, look, that was really upsetting, the response is, can't you take a joke?
Yeah.
Or, you know, what's wrong with you? You're such a bitch.
I also think you have to be quite emotionally mature to be able to say to somebody that what you just said really hurt me. Please don't do that again. I definitely wasn't able to do that at the age of 13, 14. Definitely not. So you have to be able to, maybe, you know, learn that it's actually okay to say that. But yeah, I don't think everyone
Yes, and I've seen a lot, the extent to which certain girls will go to a teacher and complain rather than go directly to the other girl because they just don't feel empowered because they feel that girls aren't supposed to do that. Yeah. And what we need to do is coach our daughters to say, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to tell somebody and express it because the boys will probably just punch each other.
Yeah, and also that it's met with that it's just honesty. A bit of a banter that maybe just went too far rather than it has to be taken to a level where oh my goodness, you were bullying or, something ridiculous when it was just learning, isn't it? A learning
Yes, and that cuts out the unintentional teasing where it was bad teasing, but they didn't actually realise because there will be an extent to which they stumble. These teenagers say these things.
They're learning boundaries. They're learning how much, where is okay and where is not. Where do I need to rein it in?
Yes. And coming to the gossip, 99.9% of girls gossip. Yeah. It's the lifeblood of cliques and popularity. It's fun. Yes. And what is gossip? So I used to live with one of my best male friends who, when I'd come home, he used to work in the attic and he'd come hammering down the stairs and say, hey, what's the gossip? Because he was bored and he just wanted me to come up with, and I felt the pressure to come up with something really funny and interesting. Yeah. And that's the thing, when someone's, because they either say what's the gossip or they're looking for gossip, you kind of need to come up with something. So a girl who's got some good gossip, a good beef, then buys it's currency, right?
Yeah. And maybe there's a difference between fun anecdotes, it's funny and light, and then there's gossip, isn't there, where you're putting somebody else down, and that becomes a bit, I don't know, maybe where the root of that is quite tribal, isn't it? It's when you're us against them, and I've found this story out and we're all right, aren't we, because we're not in it, but those people over there, and that can be really toxic. So there are different kinds of talking about others.
Absolutely. And she breaks it down in the book where she says there's venting where you go to a friend and you say, and you just let off steam. It's a pressure cooker and you just let it off, where you say, I'm so irritated with this person because they did this, blah, blah, blah. And then if that person then goes on and tells someone else, that's gossip. Yeah. So it's actually talking to your daughter and say, so by the way, if you go and tell one person how you're feeling about something, or someone comes and tells you, when you start handing that on to other people, you're now gossiping. Yeah. And think about the impact that might have and why you're doing it. What are you trying to buy with telling other people that?
Yes, absolutely. And I've also experienced around our dinner table, someone will come in with a story about someone and it's how you respond to it as well, because sometimes it's just a funny story and then it's, haha, we all laugh. But sometimes I've been told something by my kids where I actually think that was a really sensitive subject and I've responded as such, think, poor them, are they okay? Let's have a look at that. And, I'm completely killjoying the story. But I think it's really important to show them that, there was a line there, but with compassion and not judging them for telling it, but, just showing them that actually maybe that's not a good sharing story, and maybe you need to check in on with your mate and check they're okay. Yeah. So we can model that. Yeah. Not all story is up for grabs. These are very delicate areas. Yes.
We have to sort of each time you have to pick apart and think, oh, was that really that bad, or was it?
Yeah, and are you laughing at something that's happened, or are you laughing at them as a person? How judgmental are you being? Is it justified? It's a really fine line between a lot of those things.
Yeah. So the parental involvement in terms of just explaining what gossip is and explaining how you deal with these things, strategizing really is what you need to do. Going in and saying, oh, well, I'll fix it, is what happens when they're little. And one of my daughters was brilliant because she said, God, it's much harder now, because when I was little, you used to call up the parent and say, should we have a play date? And then everything was fine. And it's not like that now. I have to fix it myself. And I said, yeah, you do. It's not my job. But I can listen to you, help you think through what's happening and how you can deal with it.
Yes, that's all we can do, really. I mean, yes. that's a really important role.
And it shows that you've got her back. If you're prepared to listen to what's going on. And if they come to you with something, this is really a big thing. If they mention it to you, don't dismiss it as something that's a little, if they say, well, it's not really anything, don't believe it. If they've told you, it means that they want you to help them strategize it. They don't want you to tell them what to do. They want you to think through with them, how do I cope with what's going on? And in the book, there's a really great section that she calls SEAL, SEAL. And it's an acronym for stop and strategize. So write down every detail. So something's happened. Just sit down and, where were you? Who was it? What did they say? How did it make you feel? And this is important both for them to unpack their feelings, but also just in case it escalates and becomes a problem, then you have information that you can hand on to somebody more authoritative. And then coach them on how they can explain to that person what she doesn't like about what has happened and what she wants that person to do. What happens next. So rather than just saying, you really upset me, you need to kind of say, so this is what I want.
Yeah, or how did it make you feel? And they can explain it from that, so that it's not finger pointing. It's like, when you do that made me feel so-and-so.
Yeah, and she says it's critical, number one, that this doesn't happen electronically. I mean, I've watched some of these conversations and, my older daughters, the way that they conversed, it's just, half of it is shorthand. How is anyone supposed to understand really what you mean? And also, the problem with electronic communication is it's amplified everything. So if you send messages and you're trying to have a discussion that way, they can screenshot it, send it to other people. No, just no. At all. And also, if you're trying to tell the person they upset you, the important thing is to do it on their own, because if they're in front of any of their other posse, then they will feel the need to stand their ground rather than do the right thing.
Yeah. And from a mindfulness perspective as well, I mean, I think they're all really great strategies. But from a mindfulness perspective, it's kind of turning inwards, isn't it? How do I feel? That kind of classic, how do the people you're with make you feel, like both while you're with them, but also really importantly afterwards, because we all know there's people where we think, oh, it's really lovely and fun. And then afterwards, actually, we're completely drained and depleted in a kind of way. So sort of questioning, how do people make you feel? And do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great point. So it's looking at, so is this friendship group or this particular friendship, really, what is it doing for me? Is it so exhausting that I actually can't function properly?
It's not good for me. It's kind of toxic in a way. And teaching, as adults and as kids that, we don't have to stay there.
No,
we don't have to stay there. Or if we do want to stay there, which is also completely valid, how can we take care of ourselves in that context? How do we need to set better boundaries? Do we need to, I don't know, dip in and out or whatever it is? But we don't have to keep doing it. But we can't tell that until we've looked inwards.
Absolutely. And the dangers of being locked into a role where you suddenly realise this role doesn't serve me well at all. Like, I've got to always be entertaining, or I'm the square one and nobody, I don't know how that happened, but somehow I'm that. And I've always said to my girls, you're who you are, many things. Don't let their perception of you define you. Don't think you've got to stay that way. Just say to them, I'm a teenager and I'm changing.
Yeah, and they are.
And that's okay.
All the time, like both with what they like doing, but also with who they are. I mean, the vibes that we send out are everything, aren't they? And if we're not, they change when you're 14, 15, 16, like every week.
Yes. And what you've
but the core stays the same.
Absolutely. And what you've touched on is the A bit of the seal is affirming your right to exist without having people humiliate her. So she needs, or he even needs to say, you know what, I have a right to spend time in this group or in this school without you making me feel humiliated. So that's not okay. And then locking in or locking out of the relationship. So like you said, have a think, is this actually what I really want? Because each time we stumble, it gives us a chance to grow.
Yeah, but with the compassion as well, that actually at that age, it's terrifying to not be in. So even the awareness that this is an uncomfortable place for me to be, it doesn't really feel very nice for me, but the alternative is way worse.
Yes.
And sort of trying to help them with that.
And then ways that they can decompress when they're, so that they can cope in the group and then just go home and...
or get them to understand somehow. And, most adults struggle with this as well. You were right on your own. You don't need to be in a toxic relationship. You're better off without.
One of the points she makes in the book is that there are girl world rules about expressing your anger. And these are subliminal rules. And when I read them, I thought, oh, God, of course. Yes. And they're things like, in girl world, you can't be too overt about academic or athletic accomplishments. So unless you're in the girl world group, which is all about the athletics, so there will exist those groups where they're all the sporty girls and they're just spending time together. Girls internalise and suffer silently until someone makes them explode. They tend to laugh it off to convince themselves that they don't have to take their feelings seriously. Or they give the person the silent treatment. This is the one that guys always say, what? So they give the person the silent treatment until the person notices and asks what's wrong. Then they deny their anger and they say, no, it's fine, I'm okay. And then they get cross with the person because they couldn't read their mind.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of adults doing that.
Oh, God, yeah, all the time. I mean, I kind of hear those, and I kind of hope that girls are moving beyond the you can't be sporty, you can't be academic.
Yes.
And I think that is changing, but slowly, I'm sure, that they can shine in whatever floats their boat without being, prejudiced against. The anger issue, I think, is really interesting. I think it's... girls are still supposed to be quiet and nice and compliant within a school setting, even though that's, I think, changing a lot outside, and which is, as we know, absolute rubbish and so unhelpful. But anger is just seen as this horrible explosion, whereas often, anyway, anger is a secondary emotion. And there's probably something else underneath it with the sadness or fear or something. It's a core emotion, and anger is an expression of that. But that we all feel anger, but it needs to obviously be expressed in a helpful and healthy way. But how about we teach girls to do that instead of telling them to be quiet and
or nice.
Nice.
I've actually had a teacher say to me a while ago, I've told them they've got to be nice. And I just said, look, with all due respect, please don't tell my daughter to be nice. That doesn't mean it. What do you mean? What is nice? It's meaningless. You've got to actually be much more clear in what is expected of her behaviour. So let's set some clear parameters of what is good and what isn't.
And you would never tell a boy, I'm sure she would never tell a group of boys just to be nice.
No.
They would, and the boy-girl thing is fascinating, and I know we'll talk about that another time, but it's really different.
Yes. And there's a Bill of Rights, which I will stick into the podcast notes if I can find enough space, because it's always a bit of a squeeze for space. But, it's in terms of what can you expect from your friendships? And you can just get your daughter to sit down, and your son, what do you think makes a good friend? Yes. What's a bad friend? What can you expect? And then, what are the values of what you think is a good friend? Because this is actually all about relationships generally. It's not just about friends, and it will shape their ethics and their future life. And then say, so how does that friendship group that you're in match up to that?
That's a brilliant way of doing it, because then that's again making them look inwards. What are their values? And that's such an important exercise for us all to know. What are our values? What do we think is important? But also maybe within a context of compassion, so that we don't have a list of rules of, if you don't do that, then you're out.
Yes.
But that it's also a learning platform, and we love our friends, and yes, they can mess up, but how can we learn to voice it what you did made me feel like this, so that they're learning and it's not just a in or out kind of scenario.
Absolutely. And then I've got another one, which is the true apology, which she talks about in this book. I mean, honestly, buy the book, it's great, but it's quite overwhelming, because there's so many scenarios that she goes through. So you'll learn a lot if you can actually sit and read it all. It's a very good book. But, explaining to your daughter what a true apology looks like. And one of them being that when someone apologizes to you, don't just say, oh, it's okay. No, you thank them for the apology, because you may still be angry.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to say, I thank you for that apology. You made me feel this, and
That's interesting, because I think my daughter definitely, she had a run-in quite a while back, and she got an apology finally, which was great, and she just wanted it to be over. So she was very much, that's okay, it's all fine. And I picked her up on it and said, it's not fine still, though, is it? I mean, it's really brilliant. She's apologised, but just, careful how you word it. That, thank you so much for the apology. Really appreciate it. And maybe next time we can do this with this.
Yes. And plan for action. Next time, should we actually talk about it properly?
Yeah.
Like grown-ups or... Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a learning platform, really is important.
It is. Has your daughter had a tumultuous time with friendship groups? Is she floating on the outside or even checked out of the competition? Or are you one of the lucky parents whose daughter is in a school where this isn't a major issue? I posted a fantastic video about this called I've Got Your Back on our private Facebook group. One of our listeners has even got her boys to watch it so that they have a better insight into girl world and the pressures they're under. We'd love to hear any of your thoughts on this topic and any other issues you would like us to cover, privacy guaranteed. Find us on all social media platforms and help@teenagersuntangled.com. Now, a teacher I spoke with said that the one thing she struggles with most is her students all seem to give up at the very first hurdle. She wants us to look at what's happening and strategies we as parents can use to encourage our teens. Have you seen your kids giving up at the first hurdle?
Yeah, and this subject, to be honest, triggers me slightly, which is always interesting.
It's a bit like the previous one we did, which is, when your child wants to give something up that they've been perfecting for ages. Yes. It's a different angle.
Yeah, exactly. It's really similar to that, and it's really that balance between to do anything that is really worthwhile and satisfying. We have to step out of our comfort zone, which can feel, as in the name, uncomfortable, and maybe push ourselves a bit to do it and put the work in, whatever that looks like. And then on the other side is this idea of striving and non-striving is a big part of mindfulness. So when we're striving in a way that's unhealthy for us, we're just we're working. It's really stressful. It's toxic. So I think there's still a tradition of you can't be a quitter. You've got to keep going. You've got to do these things. Keep going, whatever the cost is. And I think it's really important not to do that either, because that's obviously not a helpful place to be. And I think as parents, we sometimes, myself included, we worry that if they're giving everything up, that where will that end? And but at the end of the day, kids are hungry to learn. They want to learn things. They want to do things. And we are a bit in a situation where we have stuck our kids, and this is my opinion, I'm slightly opinionated on all of this, as you probably hear. We stick our kids in school very young. We shove a lot of information at them, and we expect them to sit for hours learning all this information. And then we go, when they're 8, why don't they want to learn anymore? Why are they full? why are they disconnected from school? Not all of them, I know, but some of them. And it's, that's not really rocket science, in my opinion. But really, if we leave them alone a bit more, then they will probably drift a bit, and then they'll go, that's what I want to learn. And that's the whole thing about unschooling, is that at some point they'll go, I want to learn that, and then they'll learn it immediately. And I can see it with my eldest at the moment. He's he does his own thing, and driving is really important to him, so he's super motivated. So it's a fine balance, but we do have to step out of our comfort zones as well. So it is a balance.
Yeah. So for us parents, I think there's a fear. And I think in terms of giving parents help, yes, to an extent, letting your child make mistakes is very valuable. And, all the psychologists say this does work as a strategy rather than picking up everything. And because we're so fearful stepping in and trying to fix things, we do need to let them make their own mistakes. Research by Seligman, Peterson and Duckworth looked into the most successful people. And I know you're going to be like, okay. Define success. These are people who are capable of doing great things, whatever they are, whether they're sport or work or music or anything. They say there are 24 behaviours which can be grouped into 7 key character traits. Are you ready?
Yeah, we love some more categories. Brilliant.
So there's zest, grit, self-control, hope or optimism, curiosity, gratitude, social intelligence. And there's a sort of organisation called KIP NYC, which has designed a sort of big message saturation of these strengths that they've been sort of trying out in an educational environment. And they claim that this programme, what they do is they take grade point average scores, which is these horrible measures that we use all the time on kids, and they put character point average scores next to them. Okay. And so they're constantly telling them about what the character traits are that help people. And they say that the graduation rates of KIP alumni have doubled. So if you're measuring people on graduation, it's successful.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
But coming back to us as parents, Brené Brown, the author of Gifts of Imperfection, who we love.
Yes. She's amazing.
says we cannot give our children what we do not have ourselves. So this is a very, very important point, which is the way we talk about our own challenges and our own successes is going to have a dramatic impact on our children. So if you're telling your children, your teenagers, they've got to do this, that, and the other, and they're seeing none of that in your own behaviour, it's going to be a bit of a problem. And it's all very well saying, well, I go out to work every day and I'm having to do stuff. It's sort of meaningless to them. And we've also got to combat what's happening in their lives. So, for example, there's a YouTuber called Emma Chamberlain who one of my daughters pointed out. And she said, I love her because she's so authentic. She doesn't wear loads of makeup. She burps and farts and she just, she's living this great life. And she just talks about all her anxieties and things. And she's bought a house with the proceeds and she doesn't have to work. She's basically just, YouTubing her life. And so I watched some of it and I said, she's great because she is real. So I can see why she's appealing. And she has become massively successful. The big problem is the add-on was, and look at what she's managed to buy. She's doing nothing. And I said, well, you say that, but she's living in a goldfish bowl and she's probably working full days trying to package herself.
Yeah, YouTubers actually do, they spend a really, really long time doing what they do and make it look easy because that's what they want it to look like.
Yes, and they make it look effortless. And actually, the girl is showing resilience. She'll make mistakes with what she's doing and then she tries again. And so actually there is all of that is in these YouTubers, but it looks effortless. Yeah. And that's the lie that our teenagers are being fed.
I love the Brené Brown thing though. I mean, we have to model things if it's going to be authentic for our children. And I also think it's really important. I love all those words, the zest and that list that you read out. I think they're wonderful things. And if they help kids, brilliant. But I also think it's really important that the intention behind the words is crucial. If it's coming from a place of fear, where a lot of things do come when we're talking about our kids and whether we want them to be a success, whatever that looks like. It's fear-based often, so you also have to have zest, you also have to do these
I've
things.
I've seen no zest today.
Come on. So it becomes another burden, which is really stressful. Yeah. Or is it coming...
What have you ticked today of this list of things we're supposed to be?
You're not doing that either. Or is it coming from a more wholehearted place of this is a really lovely value that I'd love you to integrate into your life, and I'm doing it too, kind of thing. Let's do it together.
That's the
really
great one.
Different way.
It's also looking at yourself and saying, okay, I don't get it right all the time. So here I am trying to exhibit grit and resilience, and the grit and resilience are the key ones that people they're the big buzzwords, aren't they? And grit is something we earn and develop through experience. You can't give somebody grit. No. They have to work it out themselves. And resilience is how we come out of or recover from hardship. When things go wrong, are we able to get up and actually it's a wonderful brain development. Resilience is where when you fall over and then you think, okay, I've just got to get up and carry on, your brain changes. There's neuroplasticity there. And while they're growing, while they're teenagers, if they can get experiences where they manage to get back on the horse and because they want to actually achieve something, rather than because they've got a parent who's actually so I'm going to punish you if you don't get up there.
It needs to be within it's the intention behind, it's the context of compassion that actually, yes, it's really important to have grit and resilience. Of course, they are wonderful characteristics. And some days it's okay not to have it. Some days it's okay to just lie down and go, do you know what? Can't be asked today.
Darkened room, yes. And too much stress actually damages the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit that's about self-regulation, and it's when their brains are plastic, we need as much of that as we can because they don't have an awful lot.
God no, especially the boys don't get that even smaller.
So putting them under too much stress actually will weaken that prefrontal cortex, and then they'll do other high risk behaviours. So it's actually better not to be pressurising and stressing them. The biggest problem is that fear of failure. That's the thing that stops people. So if you think about teenagers, they're surrounded by these friendship groups that we've been talking about. And then they have to, in front of them, do something that's hard where they may not be very good at it. So what are you going to do? Are you going to put your neck on the line and say, I'm going to try really hard at this, and then when I fail, I look idiot? Or if I say, no, I'm not bothered, then, you've lost no face when you can't do it. You're like, I didn't really care. I didn't try. So it's actually easier to take that track. So Professor Martin Seligman talks about pessimistic people and optimistic people. And the pessimistic people tend to think of mistakes as personal. So it's because of who you are. They're permanent and they're pervasive. They're everywhere. Whereas optimistic people will think of mistakes as impersonal. They are not the mistake. They made a mistake. It's very different. Yeah. They think about mistakes as very specific. So that's one thing that's happened. That doesn't reflect on anything else that's happening. And it's short term. Yeah. It can be fixed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's not a personal thing, is it? And I guess, that links back to self-worth, doesn't it? If what you do is linked to your self-worth, then making a mistake will cause feelings of shame and of feeling not good enough and really all lots of uncomfortable things.
And the sentence I love is losing is something you do, not someone you are.
Yeah.
And the problem is they all walk around going, loser. Yeah. It does make it
super
difficult. But it really helps in adulthood because, I was doing a lot of creative writing and I remember the teacher saying, you've got to separate yourself from the writing.
Yes.
It's just writing. Yeah. It's not you. And I have no problem with separating myself from my writing, which is, it's great. It helps me.
As a
Still
musician.
doesn't make it good, but
yeah, as a musician, I can relate to that as well because it's, you are actually expressing a part of yourself. And then it's really easy to take that personally.
So I think we're getting at something here. When you put something important into an activity and really try, you're really putting yourself on the line because you feel that by really putting something into it and then failing, that it says something about you.
Yes.
Whereas what we need to say to our teenagers is, and to ourselves, is when you put something into it and it doesn't work, it's got nothing to do. It's just, try again. Yeah. That particular strategy may not have worked. Let's have another go.
Yeah.
And it takes time to get good at things.
And recognising that you are, again, Brené Brown, recognising that when you do that, you are putting yourself in a position of vulnerability. And that is also needs to be taken care of. You are making yourself vulnerable when you are, when our teenagers are doing something that's important to them or it's an exam that they want to do well in. There's a risk in that. So that's why you hear often teenagers going, I haven't really revised.
I've done nothing.
Of course. I've done nothing. Because they probably have, but it's much easier to go, well, I got a bad grade, but I didn't revise.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with me. It's,
busted my
I could have done it
off for that and I still got a D,
Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? That psychology. I mean, what we do as a family is we like to go on big hikes. And one of my daughters doesn't particularly like them. And particularly when some of them are really extreme because we hike up mountains. And, I say to her, you need to find techniques for coping with, when you're not enjoying it, when you're experiencing discomfort. And we do these hard things out of the classroom and out of the difficult parts of our lives so that we know that we can confront things in the difficult parts of our lives.
That is so important. That's one of my favourite parts of the mindfulness course I teach teenagers in schools is learning how to sit with discomfort. And we do two different things. And I actually think it's one of the most important things because we are, as a society, rubbish at sitting with discomfort. And that's not the same as inviting people to sit with things that are intolerable or not helpful for them. But little bits of discomfort are really important. So what we do is I give them a piece of chili and they sit and eat that. And then they use the tools that I've taught them with breathing and, regulation. And of course they can spit it out if they don't want it. But it's learning how can you sit with a little bit of discomfort knowing that it will pass. Yes. And the other one we do near the end of the course, which particularly the boys enjoy, is they have to pass an electric shock ball around, which is really, really fun. And they, the nerves of it and it's random electric shocks and they're really mild, usually. But the idea of they're going to have a bit of discomfort. What does that feel like? And then afterwards, how can you regulate because your nervous system has gone a bit AWOL? How can you regulate and come back to being okay again? And we are, as a society, not very good at that. So it's very important that we learn to sit with a little bit of discomfort
and being able to know that it will pass and that you can move on beyond it. And really interesting. Yeah. So self-acceptance is critical and it makes a person okay no matter what's going on. So these kids who are in classrooms and they're sitting looking around at their mates and they don't want to admit that they'd quite like to try this, but they're scared of failing. We can coach them. And the ways to coach self-acceptance are to validate and coach through all their emotions, like you said. Do you feel this? Okay, this is the way to cope with it, using the mindfulness to not to judge yourself and your other friends. And modelling and teaching positive self-talk. For example, I've been confronted by my daughter because she said, yeah, well, you've got to finish things. You've got to finish things. And I said, like what? What are you getting at? And she said, you've got that big project out the back where you were going to make this massive herb garden and look at it. When are you going to finish that? And I said, now that's a really interesting one, because I started out, I planned it all out. I'd read a book on herb gardens and thought, this is amazing. I definitely need a herb garden. And I'd seen things on Instagram. I did all of the work. And then when I started the project, I realized that the sunlight wasn't quite right. And it's a learning experience. It's an iterative process, because I am not a garden designer. If I'd bought a garden designer in, they would have gone, yeah, that's not going to work. But obviously I don't know that stuff. So I'm not afraid of failing. So I'm not afraid that if I start this project and it's not quite right, that I need to swerve.
Yeah.
And so I said, so what I realized when I had that conversation with her was that in the back of her mind, she had been really annoyed with me because she thought, here you are. You just start things and you give them up willy-nilly. Nothing gets finished.
Yes.
But in actual fact, we need to be open about the process, the iterative process that happens in life very often. That some things are discrete projects where they start and finish very quickly, and other things you set out on that path and you hit a bump and you go, okay, it's fine. I'll just swerve.
Yeah.
I'll just swerve. I'm not going to give up and just forget about it.
That's really important.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, two things. In our home, I think probably the best learning for all of us was when my eldest had horrible back issues, and then he had to do physio. Really boring physio exercises, and it took us a really long time to find out what was wrong. It was a long, boring story. And basically I did physio with him for months every evening. The accumulative effect of that was that it kind of made him feel better and his back was healed. But at the time, you're doing these tiny little exercises and you think, really, is this going to help? But what a great learning that actually if you do a tiny bit every day, then the bigger picture is, wow, it makes a huge difference. So I'm hoping that was a good lesson.
I think we need to reinforce it by saying, so did you notice?
Yes, yeah.
Because I think quite often it can get lost in all the noise of life.
Yes, definitely.
And that's what I had been getting wrong, that I hadn't actually said, so by the way, what I'm doing is this.
Yes.
And so coming back to our teenagers, they're going into school, listen for what they say. For example, I'm crap at maths.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're practicing some exercises. When you find that you can't do something or you get a bad mark, that just shows you what you haven't got your head around yet. So let's just, so now you know where to target to get better. I'm completely uncoordinated. I can't play netball. Well, no, if you keep practicing, you're going to get better. You are going to, it's sports. So, for example, one of my daughters really is mal-coordinated. In fact, 3 of my daughters, my stepdaughters are mal-coordinated. I can't do any of that. Well, actually, you can either say, okay, I'm going to find something that plays to my strengths.
Yes.
Or what I'm going to do is just keep practicing. And one of my daughters, when she first started doing one particular sport, every single time she did it looked like she'd never done it in her life.
Yeah.
And it was almost comical. And I had to stand behind her and say, it's okay, you're doing really well. This is amazing. It's amazing. Just to get her through that self-talk.
Yeah.
And now she's fantastic at it.
Amazing.
Because those skills develop.
Yeah.
Because she's doing it over
it's
and
hours
over
put
again.
in, isn't it, as well?
Exactly.
Intention
So it's
behind.
about saying, okay, who cares if I'm in the D team?
Yeah.
I'm going to go out there, have some fun, and get a bit sweaty, and go and be with some mates and just run around a bit.
Yeah.
So it's about sort of reframing it so they don't feel bad that they're in the D team. They feel like they're actually gaining something from it.
Because they're up against a society that kind of says if you're good at something, you're a better person.
Yeah. Or that you're instantly good at something. You're talented or you're not talented.
Yeah, absolutely. Black and white like that.
Complete myth.
And if they can understand, and this is a really big ask for most of us, if they can understand that they are good enough just by being themselves, that's it. You are good enough just as you are.
I can't think of a better way to end this segment. Coming up in our next episode, we take a look at parenting teens on your own. For some, it's because one parent takes little interest or is absent because of work. For many others, like Susie, it's having to navigate stormy skies without a co-pilot. And our question comes from Simon, who says, my teenage son is mostly moody with the odd spell of thunder. It brings everyone down. How do I know if it's just typical teenager or something worse, and what can I do about it? We'd love to hear from you. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and you can email us on help@teenagersuntangled.com. Don't forget to subscribe on places like Spotify and Audible so you don't miss an episode, and tell your friends. Right, you've made it to the end of this episode. Have a pat on the back and lean in close because I have one last thing that you need to know. You are a great parent and you are enough, just as you are. Goodbye.
Bye-bye for now.